Hi everyone, it's Joakim Achren here. Today I'm going to be talking about this topic called how to pitch your games company over video calls. So we're all living in the new age of remote, and even though the coronavirus will go away soon, but we're most likely going to be living in a state where people will still be working remotely mostly, and the change will most likely be a bigger one, and we need to adapt to pitching and showing and presenting our company over video calls more and more. But before we get into the topic, I wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Joakim Achren, the founder and CEO of Elite Game Developers. We're a game startup school, basically teaching people about the necessary topics that they need to know if they're starting their own game startup, or they're planning on maybe getting involved in helping out with game startups or becoming an employee. The topic is pretty broad. So we've been doing a lot of blogging. We have a podcast called Elite Game Developers. There's a book that came out last year called A Long-Term Game: How to Build a Video Games Company, which is on Amazon. You can Google it there with going and looking for a long-term game. A bit on my background. So I've been in gaming for 20 years. I started my first games company, Achren Helsinki, in 2005, which was doing virtual worlds for Nokia phones. It's like a terrible idea. In hindsight, the devices really didn't have online capabilities back then. iPhone was still years away. We pivoted to doing Facebook games, and eventually it became profitable for a while until Facebook stopped all the viral channels and we needed to close down the company. I went to Supercell. They were just starting off, and I was on the analytics team there for a bit over a year. And then the numbers started coming in from Clash of Clans. It looked like the mobile gaming was really taking off. So I left to start a company called Next Games, which is still around. We did the Walking Dead games, and the company is now working on a Stranger Things game. I left last year to do something new again. I wanted to start a new company, and Elite Game Developers was a passion of mine, to go and really work with the early stage founders who are just figuring out how to build a company, because I think it's a very passionate place to see new cool ideas come up and be involved in bringing those ideas up in the world. But yeah, like I mentioned, today we're going to be going into what to do about all the pitching that is now happening on Zoom and other kind of channels. So here's a photo that I picked up from Twitter. I think it was a screenshot from Heaton Shaw, who's a founder in San Francisco, and he had gotten a message from somebody like, "Hey Heaton, a startup client of mine helps businesses look more professional over their Zoom calls. As a founder, I think this would be valuable for you." So there's a lot of these kind of businesses coming up now where you're being helped on Zoom calls because that's the de facto place to be. So I think there's a lot of things to learn for sure. This is just like one of the ways that people might be thinking. I think there are reasons to look good on the call, but I think more importantly, it's about like, can people hear you versus like, do you have really like good looking clothes on? Yeah, let's get into the topics today. I'm gonna go through like 9 different topics here, particularly related to video calls. So the first one is you need to give room for the conversation to happen during the call. So what I often think about here is that you have a founder who immediately is so scared about the investor. They don't really understand the investor's motives being there, but they have a pitch deck that they need to start going through, and they're scared. But it should be more of an organic place to have a chit chat as well. So this was something that came up on Twitter. I think was a really interesting point about Zoom versus in person, and the tweeter was saying that I've been thinking a lot about Zoom versus in person. For me, the biggest difference is that Zoom is all business. If you do a 1 hour lunch with someone and you can cover like the whole agenda in 40 minutes, it'll leave a lot of room for chit chat for 20 minutes. So, but in Zoom, people just end the chat early if they finished up. I think it's part of the way that video calls are a bit anxious, and it doesn't feel natural. It feels weird, and you feel that when you're at home, you're more productive when you're doing a lot of stuff quickly. But I think hopefully this will be something that people can pick up on, that there should be more room for this chit chat, even in a pitch call, like just, acknowledging that the other person is just a human being, a friend who is interested in what you're going to be talking about. So just, make friends, leave room for just a friendly chat, and it's going to be good. Number 2, having a good setup. So this is something that people don't really think about as a really important reason for, like, how do you do the call, what kind of tooling you have. So I really like Zoom. It usually works. That's the thing, that it doesn't have any kind of like really buggy connections. If you have a really good internet connection, like a stable connection, it always works. And it doesn't really do weird things. Like I've had problems with Google Hangouts where my computer is freezing because it's just taking too much CPU. So Zoom really does work nicely. And then you can go and think about the visuals there. Like people who are, looking at you on their screen, it's great that they wouldn't be looking at, your like chest or maybe your mouth, but it would be rather like you would be at eyes level and seeing the other person really like looking at you and facing you versus like looking from downwards or upwards. So pay attention with that a bit there. There's an interesting website that I was recently looking at where they're going through kind of like the optimal setup. So if you really want to double down, because this is anyway something that people will be using for the future as well. Think about lighting as well for the environment where you are at. So can you bring up kind of like a really good environment for yourself versus the virtual backgrounds, which feel a bit bad and like you're trying to hide something. So rather just, figure out lighting, figure out how you're angling the camera, and it's going to be good. And then for audio, like thinking about using the mute button, it is right there that you can really use it if you feel necessary, especially if there's several people on the call, like the people who aren't talking. There should be a rule placed that you can definitely mute and then unmute when you want. Zoom is great because if you start talking, it will recognize that, hey, you're muted, and it will tell you on the screen that you should unmute if you want people to hear you. And screen sharing, I think it's always important to think about like closing down all the other applications that you have on your device, especially if you're doing an important pitch meeting with an investor where you don't want to waste time on like weird setups or whatnot. So just create a desktop where you don't have a lot of stuff going on, close other applications, just leave in your browser if you're showing on Google Slides or something. And then finally, talking about the network for what you're kind of using there, it really makes sense to pull your kind of like internet connection into a class where you're sure that there won't be distractions or connectivity issues there. And a final note that I want to give here actually is this kind of like a screenshot from when I'm doing a podcast recording, I usually minimize the other person's screen, because I think like you don't want to see them like fully blown in your face as well. It does create a kind of like nicer feeling for me that, you know, the person is there, but I can also concentrate on thinking about what they're saying versus like staring into their nose. You know, the smaller screen you can minimize in Zoom really easily another person and just put their face below the webcam on your display. So those kind of things are really interesting. Number 3, sending material in advance is a really good way of making sure that people who will be watching what you're doing could even like have prepared and read through the material beforehand. So I would say nobody's going to be like giving you bad time about sending material in advance. So just make sure that you send it at least a day or a half a day earlier so that they can react and read through the material. Number 4, set an agenda. So make sure that you're allocating enough time to go through what you want to go through, so that you're sort of setting the stage there. Think about the previous comment there, that 40 minutes and then 20 minutes. Maybe, you know, you could structure it in a way that you have the 40 minutes for talking about all the different angles regarding what you're doing. And then the 20 minutes is kind of like there as a buffer. So practice what you're going to be presenting, leave room for questions, leave room for this kind of serendipity, just chit-chatting, and it's going to be good. So don't wing it. Think about the time that you're allocating there. And beforehand, when the call starts, remember to ask the investor, whoever you're pitching to, like how much time do they have, so that if you're running past the agenda that you were setting, that you know that they're not going to be like an awkward situation where they suddenly need to say, just jump off. So point out early on that, hey, this is how much time we want to spend on this. Number 5, one founder on the call. I think this is a beginner mistake that can happen often, is that when a startup is starting to pitch to companies, they bring a lot of people to the meeting. So I would always say that focus on bringing only the CEO to the investor meeting. And later on, when the investor specifically asks to meet the rest of the team, then it's totally fine to bring them. But like focus on having one person who is communicating all the details regarding the company and not having too many people in the room or in the call in this case. Number 6, keep it short. If like you have a pitch deck that could be 20 slides, you should really look into having a possibility to take it down to under 10 slides, because you're doing a full screen share. People are like hurting their eyes already just trying to pay attention to what you're talking, what you're showing. So send material beforehand, and then when you're presenting, keep it really short with summarized slides and really the interesting places where you think the conversation will be. And then there's actually a pitch deck template that I'm sharing at the Elite Game Developers website. So if you go there and under courses, you can find Pitch Your Games Company online course. There's a 6-slide template that works really well in this new remote world. Number 7, acknowledge the new world order. So after the coronavirus, things are definitely not the same. People have kids at home during weird times of the day. So it's more about like saying that, hey, there might be, children running around when I'm doing the pitch. So that there's this kind of mentality there that it's fine. And I think the investors will be fine as well if you're pointing out to them that if they have these kind of like situations that, yeah, like we're just, trying to survive, move past these moment in time to get back to the physical meetings at some point. Maybe they won't ever come, but anyways, that you're noticing that we're navigating this new world here together. And number 8 here would be, how do you close a Zoom call? So I think like it's always important to summarize your notes and the ways that you're going to be continuing the discussion, who is going to contact the other person if there's things that will come up. Number 9, follow up. And finally, don't forget to follow up straight after the meeting. So all sort of like poor manners don't look good to the investor or anybody who you're pitching the company to. So you don't need to email them this kind of like an essay, but rather quick notes with the bullet points from the meeting, the takeaways. And if you have questions on the follow-up after the meeting, like what are the next steps to progress in the discussions, that's always cool to kind of send out. So, to summarize today's presentation, number 1, give room for the conversation. Number 2, have a good setup. Number 3, send material in advance. Number 4, set an agenda. Number 5, one founder on the call. Number 6, keep it short. Number 7, acknowledge the new world order. Number 8, closing of the meeting. And number 9, how to do a follow-up. Thanks again to everybody who watched this presentation. We're gonna do some Q&A on LinkedIn. So if you wanna add me on LinkedIn, that's totally fine, and I can really answer to any of your questions. And please check out elitegamedevelopers.com for a lot of interesting topics that we're covering. And subscribe to our newsletter. We try to cover interesting gaming startup related topics every week, with analyzing something like that has come up during the week that is interesting. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.